All right, welcome back for those of you who are brave enough to come back after the first two sessions. So this is the third session in our series called Key That Unlocks the Door. Um, and as we did last week, I'd like to start by just setting our intention for our session today. As most of you know, it's real important that we do that. And it's something that we should always try to carry on our mind, whether we're setting our intention at the beginning of our meditation or attending a class like this, but really should be for anything that we're doing. So it could apply all the time. So it's something that you could try to get in the habit of putting in your mind, making food, doing an activity, especially one that's has an altruistic or virtuous nature, etc. So let's calm ourselves into the moment that we're in at this time before we start, and try to bring this to the front of your mind and hold it. I am very fortunate to have a human life with an abundance of conducive conditions for spiritual practice. Recognizing the many ways I depend on others, relatives, friends, those who provide my food and other necessities. I wish to use my life to benefit them and other beings in the world, and to avoid harming anyone. To fulfill this wish, I need to work on my mind, decreasing incorrect, negative mental states and increasing positive ones. And that is my purpose for attending this class this morning. May my efforts in attending this class this morning benefit myself and everyone else. May it be a cause for me to attain enlightenment in order to help all beings in the best possible way. So, with that intention in our minds, further for the next 90 minutes or so, let's reset our focus to what we've been discussing in this series. Uh, so I'll remind you that at the begin, like I did at the beginning of last session, that you should try to hold in your mind as best as you can that what we're doing here is working on the mind. And as I put it, we're entering the jungle of exploring the inner world of our mind. And I call it a jungle because um, it's unpredictable. It's fraught with all kinds of potential negative and positive experiences that flow through our mind constantly in every moment. Um, and it's further a jungle because it's unruly um, and wild, just to use words that we might associate with a jungle. And as I pointed out before, His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls our minds unnatural state, which we constantly carry every moment as being untamed. So all of these kind of apply to the idea of the jungle. So I'm not just trying to be poetic in a trite sort of way, sort of try to viscerally realize that we're taking on um, a courageous activity here. Nothing more challenging, nothing more difficult, nothing more um, beneficial as one might accomplish what one sets out to do when we enter this world. So, of our mind. So that's why when I ask the question, why would we voluntarily go into such a dangerous place? It's because of the benefit that is possible. That we know that there is the source, meaning in our minds, there is the source of all of our suffering, but also all of our happiness. And so we're going into tame our minds to end suffering. First, reduce it, then end suffering, and then to increase happiness, and then to gain happiness in a ultimate or permanent way. So it's a worthwhile endeavor. So as we have gone into this series and we went through the first two sessions, we explored what are called the the two of the three principal aspects of the path, as they're called in this text that we're using. And let me bring the text up on the screen because that is what I should do. I have to share screen, which I will do. So, what we did in our first two sessions is that we explored developing the correct knowledge and ability to utilize the meditative tools, or what I call the weapons that we might need to carry into this jungle, um, to really start that process of taming our mind. And those first two of the three principal teachings or aspects of the path, as Tsongkapa calls it in this text that we're utilizing, are renunciation and bodhicitta. So, in the first five verses of these 14 verses, we went through um, the essence of these two. In verse 3, formally, we started with discovering why we need renunciation. And then in verse 4, we noted that the target of our focus is stopping desire for this life. We spent a lot of time on this because it's really important to understand what that means. It doesn't mean renouncing this life, rather engaging fully in this life in a way that experiences every moment in a virtuous way versus a non-virtuous way. And we talked about taking on and developing that through meditation practices, especially death meditation and meditation on impermanence, to realize, have that experience arise in us of pure, what's called at the end of verse 5, what we call true renunciation or pure renunciation. Um, and it's really something that's a visceral experience. It's an actual energy. And renunciation, as it's practiced if it's practiced properly, brings about an expansive, liberating uh, field in our minds. That's what we're talking about, in which we could then develop the second principle, which is called bodhicitta, or the wish for enlightenment. And that's what we covered in verse 6 last week. And then in verse 7 and 8, we covered how to develop the wish for enlightenment. So just reframing what we've done so far. And then as we move forward into today, we want to complete this process of arming ourselves with the proper tools, with the proper prescriptive antidotes, the proper weapons to go fully prepared into the jungle with the mission of taming our mind. And for that, we need to develop the most important. It's arguably the most important of the three principal paths, and that is correct view. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Um, but before we go into that, I want to address a few things that we talked about last week. At the end of last week, I I I capped the session talking about the two meditative practices, which are the weapons to help us develop the tools, the prescriptive tools that help us to develop bodhicitta. a direct antidote to self-grasping. I put it in the context of mentioning the three poisons, and as it's an antidote to us self-grasping and aversion, and what the antidotes were to those two of the three poisons, which were loving kindness as an antidote to self-grasping and aversion, compassion. And I talked about it specifically in doing meditative practices known as the seven-part cause and effect. And I went over that, what I said as a third, I put it at a 30,000 foot view. And the reason I did that was because it's a very long meditation practice, but I wanted you to understand its full scope and shape. And then I mentioned that the other main meditation tool, prescriptive antidote that we have, is another meditation specifically connected to developing bodhicitta. Then is called the practice of exchanging self and others. And I said that we would do a meditation on that at the beginning of today. But I changed my mind, not because well, it is a very elaborate practice if one were to do it the way that you should. Um, and I will give us a couple of pointers. Literally, I'll try to put them in the chat. I have to copy and paste them into links into the chat for practice sources where you can do these practices really well, be instructed on how to do these practices very thoroughly and very well. Um, but I changed my mind about doing exchanging self and others as a meditation to start our session today because the meditation on seven-part cause and effect is actually more directly related to Jason Kappa's presentation here about developing the wish, the aspiration to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. He in the verses I put back up here on the screen, verses especially verses 7 and 8. Uh, we went through this last week, but going through the whole visceral presentation of what it means to be swept along the four fierce river currents and this idea of like karma causing us to move into this moment by moment grasping at self and how it's smothered every single moment in the pitch blackness of ignorance, which we're going to talk more about today, which is the antidote to ignorance, which is correct view. And specifically talks about contemplating this state of our mothers. So the seven-part cause and effect meditation practice, which I described at the end of last week, is more about directly connected to this because it uses the whole archetypical idea of a mother, perfect loving kindness, unconditional loving kindness, and the accompanying conjoined with that compassion whenever a mother's child is suffering in any way, shape, or form, without hesitation, will do anything to help them. So the seven-part cause and effect meditation is one that actually is more in line with these verses. So I thought that we should do a short version of that. Again, if you want to get a fuller presentation of the parts, there's the initial setup, foundational practice of developing equanimity, followed by the seven parts. I described them in terms of how the first three act as a cause to bring about the result, which is the next two, which is love and compassion, followed by the last two, which move you into a state, an active state of wanting to do something, being moved to do something, to love, based on that love and compassion, to end suffering for all sentient beings. So I thought we'd do a short version of that meditation. And then, as I said, I will give you a specific recommendations for exploring these meditations, both of them, much more thoroughly. And I'll mention them before we do the short meditation. The sources for doing a really great presenting a really great overview of seven-part cause and effect meditation, but and also then um, giving a specific guided meditation for each part, including the foundational practice of developing equanimity, could be found in a really excellent book. It actually was recently released um, on Wisdom Publications. It's called How to Meditate on the Stages of the Path. And the path here is specifically talking about in our tradition. Most of us who are in this session are familiar with our tradition being the tradition of Tsongkapa. So it's based on giving meditations that in this book that are based on his Lamrim Chima, the great stages on the path to enlightenment. So it's really excellent. And then it also presents meditations that are directly connected to the foundational practices we do in our tradition and in most Mahayana Buddhist traditions, which is practicing meditations in connection with Master Shantideva's six perfections. So this is something then that this book I highly recommend. The author is Kathleen McDonnell. She's a veteran meditation expert. She's a Buddhist nun and really deep knowledge and presentation. And you can tell her realizations are quite deep in terms of having a real understanding and, as I said, realization of the results of these actual practices. So I highly recommend that one. And then in terms of the meditation practice on exchanging self and others, there's also she also has a great meditation and explanation of that practice, which is much more than maybe some people know. And that's also in that same book. But also, if you're more interested in reading a little bit about this practice and then maybe following an actual teaching, a video. There's an excellent presentation online by Thupten Chodron, also a well-known Buddhist nun, and it's excellent. I'll send a link to that because you can find a lot of crap out there if you Google these things, and I think that curating something that has real value and you're going to spend some time with it, you want to make sure that it has that. And then the second one I'd recommend, and both these are sort of complementary to giving you a fuller view on the practice of exchanging self and others, is by one of my favorite lamas. I've said that before, maybe even in this teaching, Lama Yeshe. And I'll send a link in the chat to that as well. I'll try to do that before we get to the end of the session, or maybe right at the end of the session, or at the beginning of next session. Um, but that's really what I wanted to share with you as far as how these specific tools, because I always preach and harp on how coming to a class like this and learning about these principles and maybe having them presented to you in a way that's accessible. That's my goal for us as Western practitioners, maintaining their authenticity as best I can. I always preach that the real work in the jungle, working with the mind, is doing actual meditation practices. So I don't want to short shrift that at all. Still, we only have so much time in these sessions. And believe it or not, 4 sessions covering these three principal teachings is a very short period of time, whatever it is in total, 6 hours total. So I feel like I'm doing a lot of condensing. So with that in mind, we're going to do a very short meditation here, which is speaking of condensation, this is a condensing of the meditation practice known as the seven-step practice, the seven-part cause and effect practice that I mentioned. So try to keep in mind, especially, sorry, I have a little congestion this morning. Try to keep in mind the verses that are on the screen when you do this, that we're working here to loosen the fierce, four fierce river currents, which we talked about, caused by our karmic ripenings that are happening constantly. Um, and we're stuck in this really, as it's put here, very visceral way, the steel cage of grasping the self in the pitch black ignorance of the lack of understanding truly how things exist, which will be the main topic of our talk later in this session. And that how we want to develop that awareness specifically and realize that all sentient beings, not just ourselves, are stuck in this cycle of suffering existence, also known as samsara. And that we're going to do in this meditation a focus on the qualities, the archetypical qualities of a mother. And if that's hard for you, before we start this meditation, because maybe your own experience of in this life with your mother wasn't necessarily one that exuded, amplified, exemplified these archetypical qualities of unconditional love and compassion of a mother, then try to think of someone in your life that you could connect to during this meditation that brought forth that kind of example to you that you experienced in your life. Maybe father, maybe sister, brother, aunt, uncle, whomever, friend, dear friend, even, where you were like, whoa, that is unconditional love. And it sends chills up your spine to think about it. Someone like that. And hopefully you could think of someone like that. If you can't think of anybody like that, then try to think of the archetype of a mother and use your imagination, your creative self to try to feel that. So, with that in mind, we'll do this short meditation now. So, try to keep that intention we set at the beginning of our session in your mind. And let's just relax our body. Close your eyes or lower your eyelids, whatever your preference. And try to sit up straight. And if you're not on the meditation cushion, then sitting, plant your feet on the floor, foot, left foot, right foot, side by side. Feel that they're firmly connected to the earth, that further they're firmly connecting you to all other sentient beings. The earth is alive. The earth is our home. The earth is our environment. It connects all sentient beings. And feel that connection. Especially during this meditation we're about to do, it will help connect you to the intention and the goal of this meditation, which is to develop bodhicitta. So just do a quick body scan to further relax yourself. Start at the top of your head. And over the course of the next 6 breaths, just sort of become aware of any tension starting at your head, your face, your neck and shoulders. And with the in-breath, try to gently grab that tension and imagine exhaling it out on your next out-breath and letting it go out into empty, expansive space. And just do that body scan for the next 6 breaths or so. Move from head to toe. Identify any tensions and use the power of your breath and mind working together to expel them out into open, empty space. Feeling that you've put your body working with your breath and mind together in such a way into such a nice, relaxed state, continue to hold that focus with your mind on your breath. Listen to the following guided meditation. First, think of someone you intensely dislike, you have a real aversion to. See them appearing clearly in your mind, sitting in front of you. You really don't want to be with them, but keep bodhicitta in mind. You might even be able to hear them, causing you to become upset by their words and tone of voice. Allow yourself to hear this clearly without judgment. See them clearly without judgment. See how you naturally dislike them without judgment. You're just using your mind to observe your own dislike appearing in your mind for this person. Maybe it's a yelling boss or someone else who gets you extremely upset. Let yourself strongly feel the aversion towards them. You don't want to be by them. Try to see that all of this narrative that you attach to them is present in the moment by moment experience you have of them in your own mind. Try to have an awareness that all those experiences, those feelings simply are arising in your mind and then they fade on their own. They come and go. They're impermanent. They have no fixed, inherent, lasting quality. The dislike, the episodes, the narratives you play in your mind towards this person are coming from your mind, arising in connection with your image of them sitting in front of you. And because you, in this moment, have the wisdom that these are only and are nothing more than moments of thoughts arising in your mind with qualities that you're attaching to them. In this case, dislike, that they are impermanent and have no fixed quality. That you, in this moment, have the ability to simply see them and let go of them. More specifically, drop them while still seeing this person in front of you. Replace, if you will, the feeling, the flow of thoughts in your mind of dislike with causing to arise in your mind a feeling of neutrality towards this person. Drop all your existing narratives that you have about them. Find a place in your mind of neutrality towards this person and stay with that narrative in your mind as you continue to see this person in front of you. Stay focused on this. If feelings of aversion, dislike arise, use your breath to grab it, and with the next exhale, expel it out into open space and bring your focus back to feeling neutral. Try to do this for the next 6 breaths. And next, we think of someone and we place them in front of you alongside of this same person, someone who you have very strong attachment to, very strong feelings for. See them clearly in front of you. Again, you can even hear them. You can hear their voice making you feel warm and loving. You have a very strong attachment to this person. And similarly, see that these feelings, these are thoughts that are present in your mind right now. They too have the same quality of impermanence, of arising and then ceasing, moment by moment. They have no fixed inherent quality, impermanent. And because of that, you can do the same that you did with the first person, which is just simply see those intense, strong, loving feelings coming forth from your mind in connection, dependently arising with that person in front of you. And simply, with your next breath, drop those thoughts and allow them to dissipate into a state of feeling neutral, having neutrality towards that person. Stay focused on this state. Maintain this state in your mind of neutrality towards them. And if those feelings of intense, strong attraction, love, warmth arise, nothing wrong with them, but simply, especially because they're impermanent, acknowledge them with your mind, and with your next out breath, expel them out into open space, bringing your focus back to neutrality towards this person. Do this for the next 6 breaths. Maintain this focus of neutrality. And at this moment in the meditation, feeling that you've gained a footing in your own mind, a calm place of neutrality that you can command, gently command. Expand this feeling of neutrality out to all sentient beings that you imagine exist. Bring them all forth in the form of humans, encircling you as you sit where you are. Imagine them all being present to you and you having this neutral feeling towards all of them. No extreme attachment, no extreme aversion. And in this state, we bring a strong feeling to our minds, specifically about our mother or a similar person, as I mentioned earlier. All very positive feelings of how a mother's love and compassion for their children has the quality of unconditional, very big, flowing, warm, full of life and concern for all her children. She would do anything to protect, help, and even save them if they needed to be saved. Try to feel how amazing and wonderful such a quality is, and try to see that from this place of neutrality, you can share that virtuous awareness of unconditional motherly love with all sentient beings in this very moment. You want them to feel it too. Let it wash over you and all that you can imagine, all the sentient beings you can imagine being in front of you. Use your breath to send it out. Feel the expansive nature of this motherly love. It opens your heart to not just feel it yourself, but to share it with all others. And next, having firmly and strongly established this awareness of a mother and her kindness, that quality of unconditional love, unconditional compassion, would do anything to help any of her children without hesitation, jump into a burning fire to save their child, do anything to protect them, even giving up her own life. Having that strong, amazing, awe-inspiring awareness of unconditional love of a mother. Bring forth a strong, strong desire, knowing that your own mother or someone similar has provided you with this same kind of unconditional love that has made you who you are today, that is allowing you to be here this morning to do this meditation. Develop a thanks, a gratitude towards them, and more specifically, a strong wish to repay their kindness. You want to give back to them all that they've given you. It should feel strong. You can't wait. You must repay them. You want to express your pure gratitude to them. And as you feel that towards your mother or someone similar in your life, instantly allow yourself to share that same feeling with all sentient beings that are present to you. Let it wash over yourself and all of them. Use your breath to send out the whole attitude of wanting to repay their kindness. Wish that all sentient beings would develop this strong wish to repay their mother's kindness. Try to focus on doing that activity of sending your breath out on your breath, this quality of repaying kindness. Visualize all sentient beings taking that on. You're all connected. And to truly cultivate being able to repay the kindness of our mother, we have to cultivate the object known as love, specifically loving kindness. We need to clearly call and bring into our hearts and minds this feeling, this feeling of how nice it would be if all sentient beings that are appearing with me in this meditation were to be happy. Have the thought that is based on wanting to repay and share with them the kindness that your own mother gave to you, and the happiness that your own mother or someone similar wanted nothing more than for you. Try to develop this loving attitude towards all sentient beings, that you want them to be happy and you will do whatever you can to bring them happiness. You will cause them to be happy. At the same time, bring to mind that you know that all sentient beings suffer, especially based on learning what we've learned in this teaching by Tsongkapa so far. Remember the four fierce currents. Remember the flow of the non-virtuous ripenings that occur in our mind every moment that keep us all trapped in suffering existence, and that we want to bring every happiness, along with wanting to bring every happiness to all sentient beings. At the same time, we want to take away all their suffering. Taking away all their suffering clears the deck, so to speak, so that all sentient beings can proceed towards happiness. See that these two qualities of loving kindness, of wanting to make all sentient beings happy, just like you want to repay your mother's kindness, and compassion to end their suffering, go hand in hand. In holding both qualities in your mind stream right at this moment, use your breath to send that quality of both loving kindness and compassion out to all sentient beings, imagining that they receive it and are instantly transformed as a result of your universal, unconditional, with equanimity towards all, sharing these two qualities with them. Do this for the next 6 breaths. And our next and final step in this meditation is based on those two qualities that we hold in our mind, and specifically the awareness of where suffering comes from. Think that all these dear living beings who you feel the same kindness towards as you do your mother or someone similar, see clearly that they are all afflicted by unhappiness, deprived of happiness, and tormented by suffering. And think, how can I provide them happiness and free them from suffering? And thinking intensely on this question, knowing what you have been learning through your own practices of taming the mind, first with renunciation, and now with the awareness of the truth of suffering existence, how you can share that knowledge of ending suffering with all sentient beings. Make the resolve in your mind right at this moment that you will wholeheartedly do whatever you can in your life, in every moment, to benefit all the sentient beings gathered around you, specifically ending their suffering and ending it forever and giving them happiness and giving them the kind of happiness that lasts forever. This is called ultimate bodhicitta. This is called the wish to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. Make the resolve to take that on, and that you will do it having an awareness of all the suffering that all sentient beings are going through, especially in the form of having visualized them all being present to you in this very moment, surrounding you in the form of human beings. Take a moment to try to firmly plant that resolve in your mind stream for the next 6 breaths. And we end the meditation by feeling that this effort that we've made this morning, as imperfect as it might be, had the right intention. And we take whatever virtue that we have gathered in our mind stream through this meditation and we dedicate it to all those sentient beings that are with us today, visualize surrounding us. Due to the merits of this virtuous action, may I quickly attain the state of Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into this enlightened state. So we now bring our focus back to the room, back to the Zoom session, and we can open our eyes, and that concludes our meditation for today. So that meditation took a while, but believe me, that's a lot shorter than a full-blown 7-part cause and effect meditation. I compressed it and condensed it. So now what we'll do, we'll move for the rest of the session on to the start of our exploration of what we call in Tsongkapa's text, the identification of correct view. But we start first with why we need it. So this is where we go from here. And for that, we look at, I have it up on the screen, verse 9. And this verse, as you can see, is labeled at the top with why you need correct view. So we'll read all 3 of these verses. Remember, they're this one verse in 3 different iterations. And as I've mentioned in previous classes, I present them this way because I feel that each one with the different wording as it's translated into English offer us something. It might connect with you a little differently than the next person and have the desired effect. So, excuse me, my congestion this morning. So I'll read the verses and then we'll go into a talk about them. If you lack the wisdom realizing the mode of existence, even though you have familiarized yourself with renunciation and bodhi mind, the root of it should say cyclic existence cannot be cut. Therefore, strive to realize the dependent arising. In the next iteration of the same verse, if you lack the wisdom that realizes the nature of things, although you might grow accustomed to renunciation and bodhicitta, you will be incapable of cutting through conditioned existence at its root. Exert yourself, therefore, in the methods of realizing interdependence. And the last iteration of the same verse, you may master renunciation and the wish. But unless you have the wisdom perceiving reality, you cannot cut the root of cyclic life. Make efforts in ways, then, to perceive interdependence. So, on the surface, the obvious point that Tsongkapa is making here, and Pabongka Rinpoche's, whose commentary we're exploring to understand Tsongkapa's text, is basically telling us, hey, this is the obvious level. You could develop these first 2 tools of developing realizations in your mind stream to tame your mind, known as renunciation and bodhicitta. But until you develop the wisdom of understanding how things truly exist, then you cannot cut the root of suffering, also known as cyclic existence, also known as samsara. So this is something that one of those terms might be familiar to you, or all of them. So one can say, okay, that's a statement, it's clear, but why not? Is the question. And I think that's something that we really, really need to explore. So, but staying with the obvious here, what Tsongkapa is telling us is that in our mind stream, we have to beat back the natural tendency we have to to misunderstand, not see the mode of how things really exist, not see how things naturally exist, not see how things are, as it says actually here in the last two versions of this particular verse, arise in interdependence. And that's a word you're going to hear quite a bit as we talk here. Um, so on pages in my version of Pabongka Rinpoche's text, he talks here about that what this really means. On page 111, he talks about that what this really means. We talk about suffering existence. It boils down to something called grasping at a self, and it's correcting the way we grasp at this idea of a self, how we grasp at this idea of I, how we grasp at this idea of me, how we grasp at this idea of things being mine that are all mistaken. And that's what we work on in the meditations that are connected with alleviating that. Stop that grasping at the improper way, the mistaken way of experiencing those things. So this is like, just to put it clearly, that's what we're talking about here. And one has to stop here, in my opinion, and say, well, why is that so important? Why can't we simply develop renunciation, as we've learned, and this beautiful thing called bodhicitta that will not only benefit us, but benefit all sentient beings? And Pabongka Rinpoche tells us what Tsongkapa is also telling us here is that if you can't actually end the ripening of karma that happens in every single moment based on previous moments in the continuity of our mind stream going back in Buddhist cosmology to beginningless time, if you can't cut that off, then you can have all the renunciation you want, which is wonderful. Lots of religious and spiritual practices include renunciation, but they don't have, and also to some degree, might include the idea of benefiting others, of compassion. But the ultimate form of compassion, which is to reach enlightenment, reach Buddhahood, permanently reach a state where there is no more of that kind of experience of ripening moment by moment experience of suffering existence, that can't be done without cutting it off at the root. And the only way to do that and is to take on in our mind stream a realization, and ideally eventually where it's always in our mind stream, every single moment, seeing things as they really are. Because as long as we see them as they aren't, which is represented here, I'm bringing up a visual in the form of the three poisons, and not seeing things how they really are is called ignorance in Buddhism. So that's the major one of the three poisons. And the major thing it causes is self-grasping. And so then that, as long as we stay in that mind stream, that moment by moment reality of mistakenly grasping onto things the way they aren't, then we experience self-grasping, attachment to things for ourselves, and aversion to other things that we don't want. That causes all the suffering in existence. Geshe Darge said recently in a class that if everyone on the planet instantly, in this moment, took on a state of compassion, within a matter of weeks, all the suffering on the planet would be gone. That's how powerful this is. and how silly it is that we don't strive to attain this. But the key to really developing that state of mind, ultimate bodhicitta, that wishes to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, it's not possible until we can cut off at its root this experience of the three poisons. And that can only happen when we cut off ignorance and in its place we put what's called the wisdom of emptiness and the flip side of that, which is called dependent arising. So without that, we can't ever leave suffering existence. It's not possible. And you could say, well, like in other traditions, there's yogis and meditation practitioners who develop amazing abilities. And in Buddhist cosmology, we have these realms that exist beyond the human realm, which are called the form and formless realms. And to use a label for them, we call them the God realms of desire and the God realms of formlessness. And these are levels that one can reach and be in for like really extremely long periods of time, but they haven't cut off at the root the misperception of seeing things mistakenly. And ultimately, those pleasurable, sort of higher states of existing have to be clearly seen as still being in a suffering existence. And even if you don't want to accept those cosmologically speaking, these ideas of other realms, put that aside. We could see examples of that in the world. We could see the ultra rich. Do all the things that they attain, wealth, pleasure, moment by moment pleasures that their wealth gives them and their fame give them, does that end their suffering? We already know that's the answer to that. So then we can just look no further than that to sort of see empirically that that's the case. So, what the text tells us is that we can reach a state even of these higher realms, but we haven't even made a dent on the path that we take to go back to the visuals that is known as the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. There's the fourth truth, the truth of the path. In Buddhism, there's these different levels of the path that one travels, path of accumulation, which is attached to having these understandings and taking on renunciation and bodhicitta and practicing virtue instead of non-virtue. Remember the 10 non-virtuous deeds. Remember the 10 virtuous deeds that we try to replace them with. So then one can sort of take and make a dent into that first path, which is called the path of accumulation, but not get much further. That's how important it is to take on this third principle teaching and to let it develop in our mind stream using meditations on interdependence or dependent arising, and then after that, using meditations on actual emptiness. So this is what our goal is in the rest of this session and next week's session is to do a thorough exploration of that. So to me, that answers why when we talk about what this verse makes a bold statement of, which is, unless you take on the wisdom that knows all things, you can't cut off the root of cyclic existence. So each one of these verses say in the last line, strive here to realize what? Dependent arising. That's the prescription. Exert yourself in methods for realizing interdependence. Says the same thing. Make efforts. So here we're talking about doing analysis and actual meditations on dependent arising, which is going to be our first focus in terms of what we're doing and learning about in these sessions to lead us towards being able to clearly see what is correct view, which is the next verse. So here, um, trying to see all this clearly, and Pabongka Rinpoche's, explanatory commentary on this verse tells us that it should result in our making an affirmation. And that affirmation should be, I am going to go and find the final form of the profound view that cuts the root of cyclic existence. So you want to really get what this verse says. And once you do, you should be able to make that affirmation and go for it. Go for it. But you want to know what you're going for. People talk about emptiness. People talk about correct view. It's like, well, what the hell is that? Why do I need it? Even if I understand it intellectually, what difference does that make in my life? And so I'm trying to put some meat on the bones of like why it's important to really do this. It's the actual key to ending suffering. And that's why I said earlier, it's arguably the most important. And actually, once one has correct view, when one goes about sort of going back and doing meditations on renunciation, associated with renunciation, associated with bodhicitta, then they take on profound meaning, much more profound, much more profound. The foundation of practice, which is renunciation for all Buddhist schools and should be for, the qualities of renunciation should be for all spiritual path endeavors, travelers. Then in Buddhism, we conjoin the second practice of bodhicitta intimately with the wisdom of correct view or the wisdom of emptiness. And then we travel the path having both of those. Traveling the path means doing specific prescribed meditation practices and then bringing those into our life and living them. It doesn't have to just be talking about reaching enlightenment, although that's the final goal, as we learned in our meditation this morning on the seven-part cause and effect. That's a big difference than sort of ordinary compassion, if you will. So this is what will help us actually end grasping the self, what Pabongka Rinpoche calls grasping the self. And we will understand what it really means when we say I and me and mine, and that's the root of all suffering. So we want to be like a warrior. We want to be able to see that this statement makes all the sense in the world, and we understand why it does. If we can cut off that flow of ripening experiences that are contaminated with the mistaken way of grasping onto and adverting things, then that's how we end karma. And therefore, the contaminated realm of cyclic existence, of suffering existence, of samsara. So it's there should be a lot of motivation to pursue it. And believe it or not, that's what these four little lines are all about. Um, and you have to make great effort to make them come about. And the text further says that one of the texts, Arya Deva has a text called the 400 Verses, and in there he says, "There is no second door to peace, no freeing yourself from the circle of suffering life other than understanding the wisdom of dependent arising, understanding the wisdom of emptiness, developing correct view." That's if you want to actually end suffering, not just temporarily, which is possible in many other endeavors or paths. So this path has some special qualities in that way. And that's what we're really aiming for here. Um, and it's important that I mention that you can join this. Once you develop it, you can join it with bodhicitta. It's known as the two wings of practice. Bodhicitta is labeled with this word we might hear in Buddhism called method. And then correct view is associated with what we call wisdom. And these are like what are called the two wings of practice. And you have to have both of them. If you only have one, you're not going to be able to fly toward your ultimate goal, which is to end suffering and to reach a state of Buddhahood. So it's illustrated in Master Chandrakirti, who's a great Buddhist saint. And he said it well in this verse. And this is in the book that we're utilizing in our guide for our guidance here by the commentary by Pabongka Rinpoche. Uh, on vast, wide spreading wings of both the conventional and the real, the king goose flies on at the center point in the formation of the other geese, all being spurred by the wind of virtue, reaching to the farthest shore of the ocean of the victor's qualities. And that's talking about you as the warrior going in to explore your mind and to tame your mind, as His Holiness said. You need both of these. Built on the foundation of renunciation, you must take on the two wings of bodhicitta, which is method, and the wisdom of emptiness, which is correct view, in order to fly and reach the furthest shore of the ocean of the victors. That means the path of no more learning. That means reaching Buddhahood. So in Buddhism, we have five paths that we travel, whether you're a Sutrayana practitioner or a Vajrayana practitioner. It's a path of accumulation, path of preparation, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and then the path of no more learning. And that's what Master Chandrakirti is saying here. So, like, unless you put these two together, then you cannot reach that shore. Um, and again, that's supposed to be our goal if we're practicing Buddhism. Even if we're not practicing Buddhism, these qualities are exemplary. And to put them in your life and to make these practices the core of improving the quality of your life and embracing life to its fullest with all of its suffering is not any different. It's the same. This is the same ticket to that. So this is very, very kind of important to understand. Of course, I'm skipping a lot of what's in the text because of time. Um, and I will say that to set us up for next week, because I want to leave a few minutes for questions. We're going to explore fully next week. We'll probably take the whole class to do verse 10, although I'll try to tack on verse 11 and 12 and 13 and 14. But verse 10 is probably going to be the most beneficial to us. Um, but to set that up, the end of each one of these verses, of verse 9, each one of these renditions of verse 9, I've underscored for you with my highlighting that we're talking about dependent arising. We're making effort to realize dependent arising. We're striving to find interdependence. So, what we're going to do next week is we're going to fully explore dependent arising, interdependence. What does it really mean? And it can be really confusing in the world of Buddhism. The Buddha himself taught different understandings of what is called emptiness. And one might want to understand why. We'll talk a little bit about that next week, but essentially, um, he had different audiences. And the aim of each one of those audiences, he knew with his omniscient mind what would be the most beneficial, I'll put it in a phrase, version of emptiness would benefit them. So, one of the things that we'll talk about next week in the simplest way, because it can become very confusing, are there's all these different schools of Buddhism that have their own view of what dependent arising or interdependence is a word that's often used, especially in other schools of Buddhism, and therefore emptiness. Well, what are these differences? And then where I'm going to take us through just a simple exploration of those is hopefully put in your mind a clear understanding of the differences and like, okay, I get that. And then the goal is to logically show you that the one that we will then take and explore, meaning the version of dependent arising that we will actually take and explore through the rest of the class or most of the class, is the one that has the most benefit in an ultimate sense of what our goal is here, which is to reach um, full enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So this is really important. And there's about I'll explore like three or four of these. There's lots of iterations, but that's where we're going to end up when we get to the next verse, which is what is correct view. And through a full exploration of dependent arising, we'll then be set up nicely to actually then do meditations on what is emptiness, which most people have the most challenging time with. Renunciation and bodhicitta experientially are not easy to develop, having realizations of them, but emptiness is maybe even harder, not just to understand, but to have realizations about. And remember, this is essential. So you want to, if any of you have challenges with your understanding of emptiness or clarity about what emptiness is, how the verse that comes up tells us that you need to develop it to a point where there is, it's actually in verse 11, where what are called the two understandings of dependent arising and emptiness. As long as you see them as something different, separate, you haven't gotten it. And that's why you want to study first dependent arising, which we'll do next week, interdependence, and then that will set us up nicely to further explore emptiness. And then that will lead us to what our final goal will be when we're exploring this thing called the untamed mind, which is to get to a point where we do not see them as separate. They're not dualistically appearing to us. Now, dependent arising is this, okay, emptiness is this. No, you just look at what I'm doing, like not these two separate things. So I think that if there's any room for you to look at yourself this week for trying to get a clear grasp of what that really is. And by the way, if you achieve that, it will put rocket boosters on your practice, no matter what your practice is. If it's in the realm of Sutrayana practices, like doing meditations on the six perfections, your practice of generosity, your meditation practice will be like they'll just be like take it to the moon, as Ralph Cramden used to say in The Honeymooners, which is an old TV show, so a lot of you young people might not remember it. And then it has incredible benefit. And if you're doing tantric practice, it will, which is a quick path. It's already a rocket ship that you're on that moves very quick. And then it will even make it more quick. And if you have that desire, that deep desire, that bodhicitta desire to help all sentient beings by reaching Buddhahood yourself, then that should inspire you to come back for next week. But there's two things before we run out of time. I want to know if anybody has any questions. I will stop sharing the screen. And we had Chappelle, we had a question that came up last week from one of the people at DNKL. I don't even know if they're there today, but I wanted to respond to them. But the question was that last week when we were talking about developing bodhicitta, we talked about like developing the antidotes to attachment and aversion in the form of loving kindness and compassion. And so the question was simple. It's like, did the Buddha ever talk about love in, you know, did he, in his teachings? And is there any documentation of that? And I quickly affirmed that there was, and that I would bring some of those up. Uh, and so what I will do for that person, is that person still there, Chappelle?
Well, no, nobody's here right now because we had it listed as Zoom only, but they might
Okay.
they might be online. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. So I wasn't sure. But what I wanted to do is, so I told that person I would follow up. I found dozens of examples of the Buddhas, specifically in context, talking about the importance of loving kindness as it relates to relationships, as it relates to social responsibility, as it relates to meditation practices such as the four immeasurables, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, if that person would like, I didn't want to do it until I saw whether or not that person really wanted to take it to this extent. I'd be happy to like put a little document together with a handful of those so that they can have that. Because actually that question was not that unusual. In Buddhism, we talk so much about compassion. And of course, in the meditation we did today, we talked about love and we talked about compassion being, two ingredients that we need. And then this question came up, but I've seen it like so many times over the years, and then also like in places online, forums and all kinds of places where people go, "How come the Buddha never talked about love?" Well, it's just not true. And so I actually wanted to make sure I took a minute here at the end of this session to affirm that, what I said last week, and to make sure people understood that this isn't some equality, which is very much associated, like for example, with Christianity as being kind of the object, love, that Jesus Christ exhibited for us and implored us to practice. This is equally as important to the Buddha, and he shared it with us in very specific contexts. So I just wanted to say that. Um, but we still do have a few minutes before we wrap up. So Chappelle, that person could let you know if they want me to put that little sheet together. If they don't respond because they're maybe not here, that's fine, no problem. But I did want to say that. And then I will uh, send out links. That one book you can just go to Amazon, the one I mentioned. How to meditate on the stages of the path by Kathleen McDonald. And that way, if you want to explore those meditations, and then those two links I talked about, I have to go get them, and I'll post them next week. The ones from Lama Yeshe and Venerable Chodron. So yeah. Um, all right. So there's a comment in the chat saying, I think end of suffering is something people I know would not really find that motivating. They consider themselves to already be happy, a happy life overall. On the other side, using achieving enlightenment is a lofty term that they would be weirded out by. I understand that. Just wondering how you provide the motivation to a new person without scaring them off. So, yeah, it's a great question. It's one of the things that I think is the most challenging because everything in Buddhist texts that we use is framed within the context of the ultimate path, which, we've been talking about. And I think that the way to approach anybody who that isn't what it's all about. Like, for example, I taught a class this past fall at a local community church here, and almost no one who attended was Buddhist. Most of them were Christians, part of the Church of Christ. That this particular church who was hosting me, um, uh, said, "Hey, we're offering this, as sort of enrichment." And the people who came, I think uh, one of the things we have to give credit to people is that they have an awareness that they have some kind of suffering. It might be physical suffering, it might be mental anguish, it might be a mental affliction in a formal sense of even being diagnosed with anxiety, depression, etc. I don't think that's uncommon. And I think those are the people who have their head up. Yeah, there are people who don't have their head up. And to try to put like in front of them, like, hey, you're not really happy. You think you are. That's very hard, and it's dangerous. It's difficult. You almost have to have a lot of patience as a Buddhist practitioner and maybe even as a teacher to have your head up, but at the same time, just be skillfully looking for people who have any kind of suffering and try to connect the Dharma to them in some way, the fundamentals of the Dharma. So that goes to the second part of your question. It doesn't have to be like, hey, you can reach enlightenment if and you can end suffering. I think that comes into the realm of zeroing in on the idea that most people can see that suffering exists. Most people would be interested if you tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, there's a way to alleviate your suffering and drastically reduce it. And it has to do with working on changing the way you experience things, both with your mind and with your speech and with your body. And you approach it that way. You don't even have to talk about the three poisons. You could talk about the disadvantages of non-virtuous activities and how you want to try to reap. You don't even have to get into karma. Those kinds of things reinforce the understanding, which we'll explore next week, the understanding of really how cause and effect works and how that's why things are only dependently arising. You don't have to go into all that stuff. It's more about trying to take the fundamentals that the Buddhist path offer, especially in the form of trying to encourage them to transform the way they think, the way they speak, and the way they, and just in little ways, and how that will change the way they experience things. Because we know that's how things work. You put something in your mind from a previous moment of mind, it will transform the way you might habitually respond to things. So I think you sort of shrink it down to the essentials and you approach a person like that skillfully. You never try to go out and hit them over the head with a big worldview like we're talking about here, but rather you bring them, you go to where they are, tune into where they are, talk to them from the point of view of what is ailing them, as minor as it might be big too. Might be somebody who, has a terminal illness and all of a sudden is causing them to, suddenly look for some relief, which is a form of suffering. So I think we have to be skillful. Um, the purpose of this class is to reframe, put back into focus for all of us, maybe who've already been on the path for a while, and then maybe not, even those who are new to it, uh, to put into refocus these three principles and what they teachings are and part of the path that they make up, how they're essential, what they really mean for us as practitioners. And then for those of us maybe who are new in this session, get an initial footing on what they mean and then start to explore them. So the scope of this class is a little broader than the questioners. Um, yeah, I agree with what the questioner said. It's hard to bring this up to somebody who this isn't what it's all about for them. They don't have these awarenesses and don't have these goals. Um, but we're trying to put into focus what might be meaningful to you that if you are traveling the Buddhist path, why you need them all. They're essential prescriptive medicines that you need to take, if you will, and they have great benefit. Whereas maybe not so much for somebody else, then you could take and distill from these kinds of teachings and see the universality of the value in renunciation practices and bodhicitta practices and in seeing things how they really exist to help people by going out and meeting them where they are and having some kind of a positive effect on them. So it's a generalized response to your question. I'm not telling you anything specific, but I think it rings true at least, and we can explore that further in terms of talking about ways to do that. But that not so much the scope of the intent of this class. So, any other questions? Because otherwise, we're at the end of the time. No? Okay. So, I thank everybody for being here. I really encourage you to come next Sunday. It's the last class, and we're really going to dive into the details of dependent arising or interdependence, put it in perspective clearly, and hopefully it shines a light on correct view for you and what it really, really, really means, and how, most importantly, we have to find a way to put that in our mind stream. That will be what ultimately tames our mind, puts it in a place where we can cut off the root of everything that we, been talking about here in terms of suffering existence. Um, so I think that's it. I'm just trying to look at the chats to make sure there's nobody else. Yeah. Okay. So yes, people saying thank yous. That's good. So hopefully I'll see you next week. It's the big finale, if you will.
The grand finale. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.